One.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Ray Tampa podcast. Our podcast offers bold commentary on various subject matters with a laser-like focus on the truth. My name is Ray Tampa. I'm the host of the Ray Tampa podcast. We have in our studio two talented and intelligent gentlemen, Mr. Russ Cato and Mr. Jamie Wilson III, my co-host. Also, we're honored and pleased to have with us Dr. Rick Davis, Chair of COQEBS, and Ms. TRENIA Cox, NAACP Vice President and Chair of the long-standing group known as DMAC, our guests. Dr. Davis and Ms. Cox, welcome to the Ray Tampa podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Certainly, we are pleased, as I stated earlier, to have you. No doubt, the matter of education is prominent in the news these days, and not just here in Pinellas County and our state, but all across the country. We want to utilize your expertise to gain a full understanding of what's going on here in Pinellas County, if you will. To begin, I want to ask you, Dr. Davis, what does the acronym COQEBS stand for?
Thank you so much. The acronym COQEBS stands for Concerned Organization for Quality Education of Black Students.
Okay, speaks for itself. Concerned Organization for Quality Education for Black Students.
That's correct.
Okay. Ms. Cox, what does the acronym DMAC stand for?
DMAC stands for District Monitoring Advisory Committee, and it is an advisory committee to the Pinellas County School Board for the execution and maintenance of a unitary status system.
Okay, excellent, excellent. This question is posed to the two of you, with Dr. Davis being first. What do you see as the top 2 or 3 challenges or concerns facing the Pinellas County schools today, and why?
Well, the issue of equitable education for historically marginalized students and families continues to be the biggest challenge, I think, in the public education system in Pinellas County, and quite frankly, for all education systems throughout the state. Today is just a different environment, which makes it a little bit more challenging in light of all of the challenges to Black history, challenges to diversity and equity issues. So we find ourselves in a sort of a new environment with a little bit more challenges on an age-old problem.
Okay. So I want to summarize, make sure I get the pinpointed 3 challenges. The first one again, say it again.
The first one is the old challenges still exist. We have never quite closed the achievement gap between Black and not Black
students. Okay, the achievement gap.
The achievement gap. So that's present, and it's been that way for a very long time, quite frankly, too long.
All right.
But today we find ourselves in an environment where all of the efforts, whether they're diversity and equity or inclusion efforts, are being challenged in this new environment and questioned by not only folks in the community, but also by some of our state institutions. So that creates an unusually challenging environment in which to operate and try to continue to make progress, to try to make sure that that disparity that has historically existed continues to be diminished.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Okay, same question to you, Ms. Cox.
Yes, thank you so much. That's a very, very good question. And there are a lot of barriers to addressing the achievement gap. That is certainly an issue. One has to do with student achievement, and that's the performance on standardized tests. That's one. So we have a literacy issue that we're struggling with. We also have a student discipline issue that we are struggling with. And thirdly, we have an issue in terms of the number and percentage of African-American teachers or minority teachers in the Pinellas County schools. So those are three of the systemic issues that we find in the school system itself.
Okay, great. Okay, so summarizing what you said, the
Mhm.
achievement gap concerns you, student discipline concerns you, and the third one is the number of teachers in the
Right,
district.
instructional staff at the
Instructional
Pinellas County
staff.
schools.
Okay,
Those are my three.
all right, good.
Top three, there are others.
Okay, top three.
Top three.
That's what I asked. Okay.
Okay.
Now, the next question, Ms. Cox, as the leader of DMAC, please share with us some of the things you all are doing to address the concerns you identified.
Thank you so much. That's a very good question. And let me share this first, just very quickly. DMAC existed because we were living in a system and a time of Jim Crowism. I need a little moment here. okay?
Definitely.
And so the Pinellas County school system, like all other school systems, were segregated.
Mhm.
And separate but equal was the law of the land. But we know, we discovered, separate but never equal. Okay. And as a result, a lawsuit was filed
Mhm.
in 1964 to desegregate the schools.
Correct.
And then there were certain areas that we were to focus on to make certain that that occurred. So I want you to have that history. Okay. So DMAC existed based on a decision that was made to settle that desegregation case. So
Okay.
DMAC comes about in terms of 1999. Okay. So that's a long time and we're still under that umbrella.
Correct.
Now, okay, what are we doing about the student achievement? One of the things that we are most concerned about is looking at how we measure it. Because when you start looking at graduation rates, we could feel some level of jubilance because the achievement gap is narrowing.
Mhm.
We're now only at 11%, and which is great.
Mhm.
The problem is how it's being measured. So one of the things that DMAC is calling for is that we always disaggregate how we are looking at the achievement gap, making sure we're counting the same beans the same way.
Correct.
Because you can look at a graduation rate and look at those who have a standard diploma versus those who may have a waiver because they're in special education, or because I'm gonna call it the old fashioned completion rate.
Mhm.
You've been there enough years to graduate. Okay. So for DMAC, what we have asked for is that we look at what some of those barriers are. And we asked for social emotional learning. What is happening is that a lot of our students are bringing behaviors to the school system that puts them in harm's way, and they miss instructional opportunities
Mhm.
because of the suspension rates, because of the school arrest rate. So what we have asked is that, this is DMAC, is that we look at social emotional learning, how it is being taught and implemented throughout the school system. That was one of our recommendations.
Mhm.
That's DMAC. The other piece, when we start looking at school discipline, very much concerned about school discipline because, as you know, we have school resource officers in our school system.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, there's been an over-reliance by some school administrators
Mhm.
to rely upon our school resource officers.
Mhm.
Okay. Rather than use the expertise that they have right there in their school building.
Mhm.
So DMAC has said, and it's been reinforced by the NACP and the current interagency agreement, is that the first responders to deal with school misconduct should be, and it's in writing, should be, and in writing, school personnel.
Excellent.
Okay, so we have called for that. The third thing has to deal with minority hiring. And although we have a lot of programs that have existed for some time, Call Me Mister, trying to get people excited about education as a career choice, we have wanted to make certain that when you're at those fairs, those resource fairs, that you be in a position to make yourself competitive. In other words, have a process that's shortened so that you can get into the school system as an educator. Many times, our feedback is that when they come to historically Black colleges or some of the resource fairs, they don't come with the proper offer. They don't come with the proper bonus. for these, shall we say, high need schools, politely put.
Mhm.
And also the process can be very, very extensive. And folks need to make decisions so they can make plans for their families and whatever. So we've asked that that process be reviewed.
Mhm.
I think that is so important. And another piece, and we'll continue to talk about this, is there's a barrier once the offer is even made. And that is also our affordable housing. It's an external factor, but it's one that affects the decision on whether or not I want to teach in Pinellas County.
Great.
So DMAC has to push
Great.
all of that for
Great.
them to take a look at what are the barriers, because we know that this 9.5% that we have of instructional staff is nowhere near the 19% of Black students that's in the school system. That's a big gap,
Mhm.
and it has to be closed.
Okay, wow, I like all of that. So we will revisit some of that, but
All
we're
right,
gonna go,
certainly.
we're gonna go now to Dr. Davis. Same question. Please share with us some of the things that you all are doing to address the concerns you identified.
Well, we began some years ago by establishing something that is known as the Bridging the Gap Plan.
Mhm.
And in that plan, there were 6 specific goals that are measured. Graduation rate was one of them, student achievement was the other, advanced coursework was a third, student discipline was a fourth, and ESC identification was a fifth, and minority hiring was the sixth. So if you look back over time and ask yourself the question, in each one of those metrics, how have we done?
Mhm.
What you get is a little bit of a mixed bag. For example, in the graduation rate category, you will see, based on outcome metrics, that the district has made some progress in arriving, at least through the last school year, at a higher graduation rate than they did when we first began to measure this outcome. Same thing with student achievement. In some of these categories, the differences are not significant enough, so it's flat across time. The movements, for example, in some areas are less than 1%, which is almost statistically insignificant.
Right, right.
So I think that if you look at the entire plan and try to assess how have we done, the jury is still out in most areas. On the graduation rate issue, if you compare Pinellas County to the rest of the district throughout the state, they seem to have done a little better.
Mhm.
So I have to give them credit for that, at least in the state of Florida. But in most of these categories, another significant area, as an example, was the representation of teachers in the classroom.
Mhm.
Well, they're supposed to be around 90%. They're nowhere close. I've never been. And that is a complex issue because on one hand, you're trying to attract minority teachers to this district.
Mhm.
And given our track record and everything that has been happening in terms of the climate today, especially in Florida, I suspect that is getting harder to achieve.
Mhm.
And then once you get them, you have to retain them. You have
Correct.
to keep them from going somewhere else because they may be displeased with the experience they're having here in Pinellas County.
Mhm.
So the minority hiring is a double-edged sword. ESC identification had to do with the identification of African Americans in the emotional behavior category. And we still are overrepresented in that category. But again, it's kind of like the presumption that somehow there's something unusually wrong with Black students as opposed to students from any other race. So in most of these areas, I would conclude that the district, although they have tried a number of things over the years, good intentions do not necessarily result in progress, measurable progress.
Awesome. Well, there's some overlap, obviously, in what you two are talking about, because both of you addressed the hiring situation, the achievement gap situation, and student achievement in general. And some other things that you're overlapping. So my question to you now is, how is our school superintendent and his administration working with the two of you in your capacity as DMAC chair and your capacity as COQEBS chair? How's the school administration working with you?
Well, if I may, the school board is one of the 4 organizations that are represented on the DMAC committee.
Okay.
Okay. So they have a legal obligation to work with us.
Okay.
And I would say for the most part, they are now being cooperative. Data is forthcoming. It's been disaggregated by race as it should be. It's timely, and they are being, for the most part, very transparent. One of the things we have presentations that come to our attention. We meet quarterly, and we were concerned about reading recovery. That's one of the strategies they're using to increase the literacy rate, because what's happening is that our students are not faring well on standardized tests in reading and math. And so we asked the superintendent, and one of our recommendations was, can we look at reading recovery and expand it to a lower level? If kids are coming in about 60% not school ready, and then we don't offer the intervention until the second year, we've lost a lot of time. We've lost an opportunity. So the superintendent, we made the recommendation that reading recovery be involved in grade 1. And that was accepted.
Okay.
So on one hand, that's a good report card right there.
Right.
The social emotional learning recommendation, we're still having to push that forward, because the autonomy that the school board and the administration gives to various schools, although you said that's very empowering, it can also be very damaging, because that means Ray Tampa School might be outstanding, have an evidence-based model. TRENIA Cox School might not have that model. And so your students do well in how to handle conflict and identify emotions and do problem solving, and my school may not. So we've asked that there be some standardization there. And we have not gotten the 100% go ahead for that to occur. So on one hand, with one recommendation, expanding literacy opportunities before and after school care, we have opportunities, we have that, but we're still at the table on social emotional learning. So that's one of the examples of our level of cooperation. It's a mixed bag, but we're moving.
Okay. I want to address one point, then I'm going to ask my co-hosts if they want to offer questions to the
Certainly.
two of you. But you just addressed a question that I was going to get to later. And the question that I have listed, is there an elementary school in South St. Petersburg that you think could be held up as a model for other schools in the district? If so, why this particular school? Now, you just said you wanted to standardize some of the evidence-based criteria used to judge schools. So this is something new that you all have put forth?
Yes, we have to make recommendations every year to the school board. And in previous years, many times, let's just say they weren't forthcoming in considering those recommendations. Now they are.
Okay.
If I were to look at a Southside school, and you probably want to look at it in terms of suspension rates, you might look at Sanderlin Fundamental School. One, look at the demographic of those who go there. Okay. And the kind of school structure that they have. Rigor in terms of academics and a high level of parental engagement. And so it's reflected in the students' behavior. Okay. On contrasting that with a Camel Park or Melrose, we got a problem because those students come from families that are high need and challenging. And many times that's reflected on their level of engagement with their students' education. So we have a model, but we also have one that have barriers. So that's one of the issues that we're struggling with, because if you look overall at suspension rates, African-Americans, 73%, that is extremely high. That's like 7+ out of 10 look like you and me. And so there's some work that needs to be done. But I think if you look at a model school in the South Side, we'd have to probably look at Sanderlin would be one of my choices.
Model School Sanderlin.
Mhm.
Okay, either of you
I have a question. I have a couple questions, actually.
speak up, Jim.
I
Here.
have a couple of questions.
Okay.
How do you rate the African-American parents in terms of the grades, grade concerns, as well as the discipline
Mm.
of the kids?
The parents, if you listen to a lot of the educators, they put a lot of emphasis on parental engagement. And that's good because there's a lot of ways to look at parental engagement. It could be that your parents set the standard for you to make sure you have your homework done. They make sure that it's checked. If there are opportunities for tutorial support, they make sure you get there and whatever, that's fine. So that parent is really engaged. There may be another parent because it's a single parent home with economic challenges, and you'll find for them, they might sign the permission slip for you to be involved in something, but I can't, they want to ensure that you get there.
Mhm.
So it's really a mixed report card with them as well. And what we're finding is that the, this is my assessment, but I think it's an educated one, is that there was a time in the African-American community where academic excellence was the number one value. Everyone said that was the way up and out. I'm not so sure if that's the one value now that's embraced. Right now, it's about wealth or indications that you are, shall we say, middle class and above. I think that's overriding academic excellence right now.
Okay.
Excellent.
My next question is, does the school district have a plan for disciplining administrators based on the students' achievement or lack thereof?
I do, well, unless you want to answer it.
Either one, yes, either one.
I get so excited about this. My lips are sealed.
Let me,
Okay.
before I get to your discipline question, let me go back and answer a question that I think I didn't get an opportunity to respond to.
Okay.
And the question was, how is COQEBS working with the district, whether they're cooperative or not?
Mhm.
They are providing us the information, and in fact, they're not just providing it to us, but they're publicizing information, although most people, I suspect, are not going out to the district website to download that information. I do, I'm sure my co-host here does also, but when you look at the areas where the district is providing the information, one of the things that you have to be aware of as you look at that data is what is the experience of children coming into the K-12 system? The point that I'm trying to make here is that the experience of children coming from historically marginalized community before kindergarten have a lot to do with the gap.
Right.
There's a certain proportion of children who get to kindergarten that are determined to be not ready for the public school system.
Right.
And that's a whole host of other questions, because that gets you into the pre-K world
Mhm.
and what is happening there in terms of preparation. There is a gentleman, I will give him credit, Dr. Jamie McHale, who has published extensively on what happens in terms of children, not only brain development, but academic development in not only the 0 to 3 space, but also in the 4 through 5 age category, which many refer to as the VPK years. And that experience, positive or negative, have a lot to do with what comes into the public school system in terms of readiness or lack of readiness. So I think that's an important point that I wanted to make. But in terms of the district working and being cooperative, I think they're cooperating with COQEBS, at least in part as a result of an existing law school that lawsuit that exists today, which was filed way back when, I think like 2000. We did not reach a settlement agreement until 2010. And since then, there have been some slight modification to that settlement agreement. But the district is still required to comply with that court order and to make sure that they are doing all they can to advance the performance and the achievement of historically marginalized students and families in the district. So that provides some degree of structure in terms of the reporting requirement, at least the ones that I receive on behalf of COQEBS. So that has been, I don't know whether you call that compliant, or whether they're simply doing it out of the goodness of their heart. But my concern have a lot to do with not just the availability of the information and the data, but whether or not that data is suggesting that the district is making progress or not making progress. And if not, why not? And if this is not working, where do we go from here? So those are the kinds of questions that I think that I find myself preoccupied with today, especially in light of this new environment where we've had challenges to how Black history should be taught and a number of other challenges to diversity, equity, and inclusion, which includes the public school system. So I am a little concerned about those, about where are we going from here, in spite of the lack of progress. You know, what are we going to see in future years? Are we going to see a regression as a result of a more difficult environment? Or can we continue to see progress, at least in some areas, whether that's graduation rate or the other? Because the other categories, such as student achievement and advanced coursework and student discipline, those areas in terms of the gap, which is the difference between Black and non-Black students, still exists. Most of it hasn't changed significantly in order to give credit for true progress. So, and now we have added to it this new environment of challenges to many of those efforts.
The political
Political environment. That's what preoccupies me today. I am a little bit concerned about whether we can even stay stable instead of regressing in many of these areas because of new challenges.
Well, Rick, you and Russ, I'm going to give it to you after this question. Rick, you addressed a question that I had written here. Are you optimistic about the direction the school district is heading? But you addressed it in terms of expressing your concern about.
I would add hopeful optimism.
You have had.
I would add hopeful optimism.
Hopeful, okay.
Yeah. Hopeful optimism. Yeah.
All right, Russ, what you have there?
No, I enjoy what you guys are saying. I just listen. But here's my question to you. There's a new term that is creeping up in the school system now, and it's called hyper segregation. And hyper segregation is where you geographically use the quota system for Black kids. In other words, if you look at the school system today, segregation is high in Black schools. It's coming back in most of the schools in the urban area. Now, if you look at hybrid education, that is not good for Black kids. Now, let me go back, and the reason I'm saying that, I go back to this thing called the failure factor. Remember that kind of stuff? Yeah. Remember that? Okay, listen to this. Those 5 schools that were on that failure list, and this is before, in 2007, the Pinellas County school system abandoned integration, got rid of it. But let's go back and look at it. Well, look at these 5 schools that was a failure factor before they abandoned integration. Fairmount Park, before 2007, was an A school.
Before 2007
was an A school. Half of the students were reading above level, 59% in math. Campbell's Park and Lakewood was B schools. Maximo and Melrose were C schools. Those same schools, when they abandoned the integration system, and I'm going to tell you why, because busing was closing this gap. Believe it or not, people didn't see that. You got to go, I'm not going to get, because it's another time, but you got to go back and really get into busing, what it really did. Because during that time, busing placed a quota, I'll ask you this question, placed a quota on Black kids. For instance, in 1971, the quota came out that no school can have more than maybe 39% Black kids in the school system. And 2003, 2004, no more than 44%. Now, if you look at failure schools today, look at the population of Black kids. It's way over 60%. Something is wrong here.
Hey, Russ, you're making some very valid points.
I want to ask.
And I'm gonna tell you, this is the point that I hate. 30 minutes goes quite quickly
Yeah.
when you're having fun.
Yeah.
When you're having fun. So I'm gonna have to cut Russ off
Yeah, I'm just
Great.
going
and not give them an opportunity to respond because we're out of time.
Yes.
Oh my God.
Because I
But I tell you what, listen to me carefully. We can always invite you back for part two. For
Yes,
part two.
yes, yes.
And having said that, I want to thank our guests. I want to thank our guests for being here today. You've offered a lot of valuable information to our audience. I want to thank my co-hosts for doing a great job as you always do. I want to thank the listening audience for tuning in to the Ray Tampa podcast each and every Tuesday, 5:30 p.m. on 99.1 FM, The Bird. And you can also go to YouTube, type in the Ray Tampa podcast, and you can view them all. Lastly, sponsorships are welcome. With all that being said, good evening.